Let's dig into the detail then of Starmer's ideas on how he's going to solve the UK housing crisis with James Vitali, who's a research fellow at Policy Exchange. Good evening, James. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me on.
I just wonder broadly whether you think Keir Starmer has the right idea. You published your own paper, didn't you, on the future of housing a few months ago. Did he hit the right notes? I suppose what I'm saying is it sounds good, but is it workable?
Yeah, people like me in think tanks can pick through the detail, but the first thing to say is the politics of this are really encouraging, and the Labour Party deserves credit for taking this issue on. Over recent weeks, we've seen the Labour Party and Starmer announce a sort of series of potential measures. And what this shows is that the political calculus has changed. They've decided that they think there's political capital in talking about housing and challenging the government on its record on housing. And that can only be a good thing for the country. It's good for helping younger people get onto the housing ladder. It's also good for economic growth. In terms of the specifics, perhaps we'll go into a few of those. The big one today was the sort of announcements about Greenbelts, but there's a whole package they've been discussing. They've been discussing planning reforms, they've been discussing council housing, and the real question will be, will they follow through on any of these things? What's going to stick? What we're going to see in the manifesto come the next general election?
Yeah, this, can't be a party political broadcast for the Labour Party. Anyone can make these pledges, but it's another thing trying to execute them. And the Conservative Party has found that some of these, policies aren't completely out of line with what we've heard from the Conservatives, are they? It's just that they've never been able to execute them.
Sure, exactly. And I think the charge is particularly damaging to the Conservative Party, however, because they have always considered themselves the party of homeowners, the party of home ownership. And because the record has been pretty patchy, to say the least, for the last 13 years, this gives the Labour Party a great opportunity to sort of claim that policy area as their own. But like you said, a lot of these ideas aren't new. They've been in circulation for ages. The key is, have they got the political stomach to see some of them through?
What seems to happen, I think, is that sweeping policies can come in, let's say building on the Greenbelt, which sort of only accounts for about 13% of the problem. There's 14 Greenbelts in England, 1 in Wales, and it's actually kind of a fairly small amount of space when you look at the bigger picture, I suppose. That is, definitely a big pitch from Keir Starmer. But these sort of nationwide policies often get blocked on a local level, which is something that the Labour Party will need to get a handle on. Of course, not everyone within local areas around England, for example, is going to allow some of these things to happen. So are we, talking about whole-scale reform of the planning laws as well to stop building being blocked?
Yeah, I'll try and take a few of those in turn. I mean, on the Greenbelt is an interesting thing today that Michael Gove sent a letter to the Leader of the Opposition saying, look, I've seen what you've had to say about Greenbelt policy, but does this conform with what you've had to say about giving local communities greater control? Because fundamentally there is a trade-off to be made there.
Yeah, of course.
If you're going to say that developers have a greater right to develop on the Greenbelt, what are local residents going to say? You're right too that 13% of the land in England is Greenbelt, but that's 13% compared to 2%, which is residential land. And I think, given we have a housing crisis, this is something that needs to be looked at. I mean, Policy Exchange has written about this subject before. There is a sensible compromise to be made. Unfortunately, with the Greenbelt, the idea of, the fact of the matter is not all land in the Greenbelt is, green. A lot of it isn't particularly high quality land, particularly around transport infrastructure, which would be perfect because it's well connected to jobs in London. So there's a sensible compromise to be had there. Again, it's the political debate that has to be had with homeowners in the area already. Are they happy to have that battle with them?
So there are some perhaps easier wins here. The whole, purpose of the Greenbelt is to sort of prevent urban spread, isn't it, between towns? It just mean that towns don't sort of go on forever and then just leak into each other. So there is perhaps some sense to that, and I'm sure that many towns will be open to expanding. Infrastructure, though, is going to be a big part of this too. Did he have much to say about that today? Because it's all very well building on the Greenbelt, perhaps making some towns bigger, but you've got to have the infrastructure in place to then support that. And this is a particular issue, isn't it, with extending towns, building around the outskirts of towns?
Yeah, absolutely right. I think, to be frank, we haven't had enough detail to make a judgment on that. What I think for many of us in the policy world, what we'd like to see is greater density in our cities already, and there's some stuff that can be done there to increase the density of our cities. I think developing around transport infrastructure is probably a good idea, because it's, as I said, it's not necessarily green plots, and it'd be well connected to the cities. But also, I think the Labour Party does have to say what its policy is on the Greenbelt more generally. Would good green land be reclassified as area of outstanding natural beauty, for example? Would it be further protected to prevent that urban sprawl that you mentioned? Again, we're sort of still waiting for the details. But you raised planning reform. That's another thing that we're going to want to see some greater clarity on. There was a white paper in 2020 that the government released. It basically got dropped after a by-election in Chesham and Amersham. Are Labour Party going to be brave enough to take that on? These are details we're going to want to see in the coming months.
James, really interesting to speak to you. Thank you. James Vitali, who's a research fellow at Policy Exchange. Thanks for joining us, James.